If someone had told me a year ago that the loudest, most disruptive part of my life would become its quiet center, I would have laughed. Not a real laugh, but the dry, papery sound I reserve for absurdities. My life was a library, meticulously cataloged and silent. I was the head librarian of my own existence, and I tolerated no overdue books and certainly no loud noises. Then there was Julian. He lived in the apartment directly above mine. He was not a person so much as a series of seismic events. Heavy boots on his hardwood floor were my 6 a.m. alarm clock. The low thrum of some obscure, bass-heavy music was the soundtrack to my evenings. Sometimes a loud curse, a dropped tool, the scrape of furniture. He was chaos in masculine form. From my window, I watched him. He was a carpenter, a builder of things. I saw him leaving in the morning, sawdust on his jeans, a pencil behind his ear. He was tall, broad in a way that seemed to take up more than his allotted share of space in the world. His arms were a roadmap of veins and sun-faded tattoos I could never quite make out. I decided he was arrogant. It was an easy conclusion to draw. People who took up that much space, who made that much noise, had to be overflowing with a self-importance I found grating. He moved with a certainty I had never known. He never seemed to hesitate, never seemed to second-guess the space he occupied. We had a routine of a sort, a non-routine. If we passed on the stairs, I would fix my gaze on the worn floral pattern of the runner, counting the threads until he passed. He would sometimes grunt a hey, the sound like rocks tumbling downhill. I would offer a tight, closed-mouth nod in return, my neck stiff with a resistance I could not name. My apartment was my sanctuary. Books were my bulwark against the world. They were stacked on every surface, spines creating colorful, silent towers that buffered me from the unpredictability of other people. My job as a university archivist was an extension of my life, quiet, ordered, dealing with the past because the present was too loud. Too much like Julian. The distance between us was the floorboards, but it felt like a chasm. He was the physical world of sweat and wood and noise. I was the world of paper and ink and silence. We were antithetical, opposites that, according to the laws of magnetism I vaguely remembered from school, should attract. But that was physics. This was my life, and I preferred to keep my own poles aligned. I had built a fortress of solitude, and from its highest window, I watched him and I judged him, and if I was honest, I felt a sliver of something that might have been envy. But I buried that feeling deep under layers of academic dust and the comforting scent of aging paper. It was safer there. My routine was my armor. Wake at 5:45, before his boots started their morning thunder. Coffee black. Toast dry. Read for an hour. Walk the 27 blocks to the archives. Spend 8 hours with dead poets and forgotten politicians. Walk home. Make a simple dinner. Read until my eyes burned. Sleep. Repeat. It was a life. A small, controlled life. And I was, if not happy, then content in its predictability. There were no sudden movements, no unexpected variables. Until the water. It started as a drip. A tiny, insignificant sound from the kitchen. I ignored it, turning a page. Then it became a plink-plunk rhythm, a maddening little water torture. I got up annoyed. A dark spot was blooming on the ceiling above my sink, pregnant and threatening. I watched, frozen as the spot grew. It darkened from beige to brown. A drop fell, then another. Then the ceiling, with a sigh of wet plaster, gave way. Water, not a drip but a deluge, cascaded down. It hit the counter, splashing onto the floor, onto my carefully stacked collection of culinary histories. I stood there for a full 10 seconds, my brain simply refusing to process the violation. My sanctuary was drowning. My first coherent thought was, Julian. It had to be him. His bathtub had probably overflowed while he was listening to his deafening music. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. It was so potent it made my hands shake. I ran out of my apartment, not even bothering to lock the door, and took the stairs 2 at a time. I pounded on his door, my fist making a sound that felt alien and loud. It felt like something he would do. The music inside cut off. The door swung open, and there he was. No shirt, a pair of low-slung gray sweatpants. His chest was damp with sweat, not water. He was holding a wrench, and his knuckles were bleeding. He wasn't arrogant. He just looked tired. "What?" he asked, his voice rough. "My ceiling." I gasped, pointing lamely down the stairs. "There's water." Everywhere his eyes widened. He didn't hesitate. He dropped the wrench with a clang, pushed past me, and sprinted down the stairs. I followed, feeling suddenly foolish and small. The rage had evaporated, replaced by a hollow sort of panic. He stood in my kitchen doorway, taking in the scene. The waterfall, the ruined books, the spreading puddle on my worn linoleum floor. "Shit," he breathed. He looked at me, his eyes dark with what looked like genuine concern. Okay. Main shutoff is in the basement. I'll be right back. Don't touch anything electric." He was gone again, his footsteps echoing. I stood there, shivering, watching the water pour over my life. The order was gone. The silence was shattered. My bulwark had been breached. When he returned, the deluge had slowed to a trickle. He had a smudge of dirt on his cheek. "It's the main stack," he said, his voice grim. "Old pipe. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. It just went." He ran a hand through his damp hair. "I called the landlord. He's out of town, of course. He said he'll get a plumber here tomorrow morning, but they're going to have to rip out the whole ceiling. Maybe the wall." He looked around my soaked, ruined apartment. He looked at my face. I'm sure I looked as broken as I felt. "You can't stay here tonight," he said. It wasn't a question. I just stared at him, my mind a blank slate. Where would I go? My life was contained within these four walls. I had no one to call. He seemed to understand. He scrubbed a hand over his face, a gesture of weary resignation. "Look, it's not ideal. I know I'm not the quietest neighbor." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was the first time I had ever seen him smile. It changed his entire face. "But I have a couch. A big one. You can stay with me until this is sorted." The offer hung in the air between us, thick and unbelievable. Me, in his space, in the epicenter of the noise. It was unthinkable. But the alternative was a hotel room, sterile and anonymous, or sitting here in the damp, watching mold begin its silent conquest. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word a tiny, foreign sound in the dripping silence. "Okay, thank you." He just nodded, his gaze steady. "Grab whatever you need. Clothes, your books, whatever wasn't hit." I moved like an automaton, gathering a change of clothes, my toothbrush, and a single miraculously dry paperback. I felt his eyes on me the whole time, a weight I wasn't used to. It wasn't a judgmental gaze. It was just watchful. He carried my small duffel bag upstairs. I followed him into his apartment, my heart a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. I was crossing a threshold I had never imagined crossing. His apartment was the negative image of mine. Where mine was cluttered with the quiet artifacts of the mind, his was cluttered with the tools of the body. Saws and drills were mounted on a pegboard wall. Blueprints were spread across a massive wooden table. The air smelled of sawdust and lemon-scented oil, a scent so clean and alive it felt like an assault. But it wasn't chaos. Not really. There was an order to it, a logic. The tools were clean, arranged by size. The blueprints were weighted down and organized. And on a shelf, nestled between a stack of wood samples and a jar of screws, was a row of books. Poetry, Neruda, Mary Oliver. The same copy of Walt Whitman I had on my own nightstand. The discovery sent a jolt through me, a little shock of cognitive dissonance. The loud, arrogant brute from upstairs read Neruda. "Couch is here," he said, gesturing. It was a huge, worn leather thing, big enough for two of me to sleep on without touching. He tossed a clean blanket and a pillow onto it. "Bathroom's there. Help yourself to anything in the fridge. I don't have much. Milk, eggs, some beer." He stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, as if he were the guest and not me. I have to be on site at 5, so I'll be up early." "That's fine," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm used to it." A flicker of something crossed his face. Realization, maybe even a hint of shame. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Sorry about that." He disappeared into his bedroom and shut the door, leaving me alone in the vast, unfamiliar space. I sat on the edge of the leather couch. It was soft, yielding. It smelled faintly of him, that sawdust and something else, something warm and human. I was in the belly of the beast, and it was nothing like I had imagined. It was quiet. It was orderly. It was peaceful. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator and the frantic thumping of my own heart. That night, I didn't sleep well. I was too aware of him, just a thin wall away. I could hear the quiet creak of his bed as he shifted, the soft sound of his breathing. These were not the loud, intrusive noises I was used to. They were small, intimate sounds, and they felt more invasive than any dropped hammer ever had. The next day, I went to work. The plumbers had arrived, and the sound of destruction from my apartment below was a constant, grinding reminder of my displacement. When I got back to Julian's that evening, he was already there, cooking. The apartment was filled with the smell of garlic and roasting chicken. "Figured you wouldn't want to order in again," he said, not looking at me. He was focused on basting the chicken with a practiced efficiency. His hands, which I had only ever seen holding tools or clenched in fists, were surprisingly deft. They were large hands, the knuckles scarred, the nails short and clean. Calluses patted the palms and fingers, testament to years of hard, physical work. We ate at his massive work table, plates balanced on top of a blueprint for a staircase. The silence was different from my usual silence. It wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken things, of the clink of our forks and the sound of our breathing. "So," he said, finally breaking it. "You're an archivist, yes?" I said, surprised he knew the word. "At the university?" I nodded, my mouth full of chicken that was, to my surprise, perfectly cooked. "You like it?" "Old stuff. I like the quiet," I admitted. "I like that things are settled. The stories are already written." He considered this, chewing slowly. "I get that," he said. "I like making new things, taking a pile of wood and making it into something that'll be around for 100 years. A staircase, a bookshelf." He glanced at his own bookshelf and then at me. "Something to hold the stories." My heart did a strange little flip. Something to hold the stories. He understood. He wasn't just a collection of loud noises. He was a thinker, a builder. That evening, exhausted from the stress and the lack of sleep, I fell asleep on the couch while reading. I didn't mean to. One moment I was tracing the lines of a poem. The next, the book had slipped from my fingers and the world went soft and dark. I woke up slowly, feeling a warmth I couldn't place. There was a weight on my legs. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the dim light of the living room. A single lamp was on. Julian had put a blanket over me. Not the one he had given me the night before, but a thick, heavy quilt that smelled like him. He must have come out of his room and found me. The thought sent a flush of heat through my body. He was sitting in the armchair across from me, not reading, not looking at his phone, just sitting in the near dark, watching me sleep. My breath caught in my throat. I should have been terrified, or at least unnerved. A practical stranger, this big, imposing man, had been watching me in a vulnerable state. But I wasn't scared. The look on his face held no malice, no judgment. It was quiet, contemplative, and deeply, deeply lonely. I saw it then. The confidence was a suit of armor. The noise was a way to fill the silence. Underneath it all, he was just as solitary as I was. Maybe more so. My solitude was a choice, a carefully constructed defense. This felt like a sentence. I pretended to still be asleep, my heart hammering against my ribs. I watched him through my eyelashes. He sighed, a soft, weary sound. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air for a long moment before he gently pulled the quilt up a little higher over my shoulder. His fingers brushed my neck. It was nothing, a ghost of a touch, less than a second of contact. But it was like a lit match to dry kindling. A jolt of pure electricity shot through me, so intense I was sure it must have made a sound. My skin burned where he had touched it. Every nerve in my body was suddenly awake and screaming. Heat. A sudden, overwhelming heat that had nothing to do with the quilt. It started in my chest and spread outwards to the tips of my fingers, the roots of my hair. My stomach felt like it was full of frantic, buzzing bees. He pulled his hand back quickly, as if he'd been burned. He stood up and disappeared back into his bedroom without another sound. I lay there for a long time, my eyes wide open in the dark, my skin still tingling. The air was thick with the aftershock of that tiny, accidental touch. It had changed something. The tectonic plates of my little, ordered world had shifted, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that nothing would ever be quite the same. The next day, the dynamic between us was different. The air was charged, brittle. We avoided looking at each other. When he handed me a coffee mug in the morning, our fingers brushed. We both flinched back as if shocked. I found myself watching his hands constantly, the way they wrapped around his mug, the way they expertly handled a chisel as he worked on a small piece of wood at his table, the way they gestured when he talked. I imagined those hands on me, and the thought was so powerful it made me feel lightheaded. The plumbers told me it would be at least a week. A whole week. The thought used to be a nightmare. Now, it felt like a reprieve. A dangerous, terrifying, wonderful reprieve. One evening, I came back to find him hunched over a pile of paperwork on his table, his head in his hands. A letter from the city was on top, full of dense, bureaucratic language. "Everything okay?" I asked, hovering in the doorway. He looked up, and the frustration on his face was stark. "It's this permit for the historical restoration project I'm on. They're saying my application is incomplete, but I don't understand what they even want. It's like it's written in another language." Here was my world. Language. Rules. Obscure text. For the first time since I had entered his apartment, I was on solid ground. "Let me see," I said, my voice firmer than it had been in days. I sat down next to him, the proximity of his shoulder to mine a low hum of electricity. I read the letter, then the application he had filled out. It took me 15 minutes to decipher the legalese and cross-reference the city codes he had missed. "Here," I said, pointing to a subsection. "You need to attach a materials provenance report. And here, they want the structural assessment filed under a different appendix." He stared at the page, then at me. "How did you—" "I spend my life reading things no one has looked at in 100 years, I said with a small shrug. "This is practically modern English." He let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a real laugh this time, and it was a wonderful sound. "A materials provenance report," he said, shaking his head. Of course, he looked at me, his eyes full of a new kind of respect. "Thank you, Leo. Seriously. You just saved me weeks of headaches, Leo." He had used my name. It sounded different in his mouth. Solid. Real. In that moment, we weren't the loud neighbor and the quiet one. We weren't the builder and the reader. We were just two people helping each other. The power dynamic, the one where he was the capable one and I was the helpless refugee, had leveled out. We were equals. That night, a storm rolled in. Not a gentle rain, but a full-blown thunderstorm. The wind howled, rattling the large windows in Julian's apartment. The rain came down in sheets, a relentless drumming that drowned out every other sound. Then, with a final furious crack of thunder that shook the building, the lights flickered and died. We were plunged into absolute darkness. "Well," Julian's voice came out of the black, startlingly close. Perfect. I could hear him fumbling around. The scrape of a drawer opening. The click-click-click of a lighter that wouldn't catch. "Here," I said, my own voice shaking slightly. "My phone." I turned on a flashlight, the sudden beam cutting a sharp, narrow path through the oppressive dark. It landed on his face. He was closer than I thought, kneeling by a low cabinet. His eyes, wide and reflecting the light, found mine. My breath hitched. He found a couple of thick, vanilla-scented candles and lit them. The room filled with a soft, flickering glow. The shadows danced on the walls, making the space feel smaller, more intimate. A cocoon against the raging storm outside. We sat on the floor, our backs against the leather couch. The world was reduced to this small circle of light, the scent of wax and rain, and the sound of the thunder rumbling in the distance. "My grandmother loved storms," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "She used to say it was the world clearing its throat." I had never thought of it that way. For me, storms were just another disruption, another loud noise. "You were close with her?" I asked, drawn into the unexpected quiet of the moment. "She raised me," he said, staring into the candle flame. "My parents, they weren't really the parenting type. She was my person." He paused. "She's the one who got me into Whitman, my carefully constructed image of him shattered into a million pieces. The arrogant man I had invented was gone, replaced by this person in the candlelight, his face open and vulnerable, speaking about his grandmother and poetry. "I'm sorry," I heard myself say, the words feeling heavy and inadequate. "That I judged you." He turned his head, his eyes finding mine in the flickering light. "Judged me for what?" "For the noise," I admitted, my cheeks burning. "For being big. I thought you were just this careless, arrogant guy who didn't give a damn about anyone else." A slow, sad smile touched his lips. "I get that a lot," he said. I think I make noise so I don't have to hear how quiet it is in here when I'm alone." The confession hung in the air between us, raw and honest. It was the truest thing anyone had ever said to me. It was a key, turning a lock deep inside my own chest. Because I understood. My silence was the same as his noise. Just a different way of coping with the same gaping emptiness. "I'm always alone," I whispered, the admission tasting like rust in my mouth. "I built my life around it." "Why?" he asked, his voice gentle. "It's safer," I said, the truth of it feeling flimsy and pathetic in the face of his honesty. "No one can hurt you if you don't let them in. No one can help you." "Neither," he countered softly. He shifted, turning to face me more fully. Our knees brushed. The contact was a bonfire. Every nerve ending flared to life. The storm outside raged. The candlelight flickered. But in our little bubble of existence, the only storm that mattered was the one brewing between us. The air was thick with unspoken years of loneliness, of misunderstood glances on the stairs, of the space between the floorboards. "Leo," he said, and my name was a prayer. He leaned in, slow, hesitant. His eyes searched mine, asking a question I was too terrified and too desperate to answer with words. I could see the flicker of the candle flame reflected in his pupils. I could smell the rain on his clothes, the sawdust, the vanilla from the candle, and him. Just him. I didn't move. I couldn't. My entire world had shrunk to the few inches between his lips and mine. His hand came up, not to my neck this time, but to my cheek. His thumb was rough with calluses, but the touch was unbelievably gentle. It was a question. "Are you sure?" I leaned into his touch, just a fraction of an inch. It was my answer. Yes. And then he closed the distance. His lips were not what I expected. They were soft, hesitant, questioning. It wasn't a kiss of frantic passion, but of discovery. It was a slow, careful exploration of a territory both of us had only ever viewed from a distance. It was the most honest conversation I'd ever had. The kiss was the world clearing its throat. And in the silence that followed, everything was new. I woke up the next morning with a gasp. Sunlight, bright and unforgiving, streamed through the windows. The storm was over. The power was back on. And I was alone. I was on a couch, tangled in the heavy quilt. The candles were snuffed out. A cold, empty coffee mug sat on the floor. But the apartment was silent. Too silent. A knot of pure, cold dread formed in my stomach. I sat up, my heart pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm. "Julian?" "Nothing." I swung my legs off the couch and walked to his bedroom door. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The bed was made. Perfectly made. The room was empty. He was gone. He had to leave for work at 5, I told myself. He said that the first night. It was probably past 7 now. He just left for work. But there was no note. No text. No sign that the night before had even happened, except for the lingering, phantom feeling of his lips on mine, the ghost of his callous thumb on my cheek. My mind, my treacherous, overthinking mind, went into overdrive. It was a mistake, a fluke of the storm, the candlelight, the vulnerability. He regretted it. He was disgusted. He was straight, for God's sake, what was I thinking? He was just being kind to his pathetic, flooded-out neighbor, and I had read everything wrong. He probably couldn't get away from me fast enough. The anxiety was a physical thing, a clawing beast in my chest. The quiet of the apartment was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. The books on a shelf seemed to mock me. Something to hold the stories. What a fool I'd been. I gathered my things in a haze of self-recrimination. I folded the quilt and placed it neatly on the couch. I washed my coffee mug and his, placing them back in the cupboard. I felt like a trespasser, A ghost haunting a space where I was no longer welcome. I wrote a note. My hand shook so badly the words were barely legible. Thank you for everything. The plumbers are done for now. I can manage back in my place. Now, it was cold, formal, pathetic. I left it on a massive work table, right next to the blueprints for the staircase. Walking back into my own apartment was like stepping into a tomb. The air was damp and smelled of plaster dust. Plastic sheets covered my furniture. It was a wreck, but it was my wreck. My fortress. Damaged, but still standing. I spent the day in a fog. I tried to read, but the words blurred. I tried to clean, but I just moved dust from one surface to another. Every creak from the floorboards above was a fresh torment. Was that him pacing? Was he thinking about me? Or was he just moving on with his life, the night before already a forgotten anomaly? The silence was the worst part. My old, comfortable solitude was gone, replaced by a screaming, hollow absence. Before I was alone. Now I was lonely. There was a difference. A terrible, soul-crushing difference. I could feel his absence like a physical presence in the room, a Julian-shaped hole in the universe. A day passed, then another. 24 hours. 48 hours of unrelenting silence. I heard him come home from work. I heard the low thrum of his music, but it was different now. Softer. Melancholy. Or maybe I was just projecting my own misery onto it. I didn't leave my apartment. I couldn't face the possibility of running into him on the stairs. I couldn't bear to see the pity or disgust, or, worst of all, the polite indifference on his face. My old life, the one I had so carefully curated, was waiting for me. The routine, the silence, the books. But I couldn't go back. He had shown me what it was like outside the walls of my fortress, and now the fortress just felt like a prison. The kiss hadn't just been a kiss, it had been a wrecking ball. It had demolished everything. On the evening of the second day, I was sitting in the dark, staring at the plastic sheeting that covered my bookshelves when there was a knock on my door. It wasn't a loud, confident knock. It was quiet, hesitant. My heart stopped. I didn't move. Maybe if I was quiet enough, he would go away. He would think I wasn't home. I could just disappear back into the silence. It was safer. The knock came again, a little more insistent this time. Now, his voice. It was muffled by the door, but it was him, and it sounded wrecked. My feet moved before my brain could stop them. I walked to the door, my hand hovering over the knob. This was it, the moment of truth, the polite brush-off, the awkward apology. I braced myself for the impact. I opened the door. He stood there under the dim, buzzing light of the hallway sconce. He looked worse than I felt. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hair was a mess, as if he'd been running his hands through it for 2 days straight. He was wearing the same work jeans from that morning, stained with something that looked like varnish. He clutched a single, perfect gardenia in his hand. He just looked at me, his chest rising and falling too quickly. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His eyes said everything. He was just as scared as I was. "Can I?" he started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat. "Can I come in?" I stepped back, opening the door wider. He walked into my disaster zone of an apartment, looking around at the plastic-draped furniture and the scarred, naked ceiling. He looked as out of place here as I had felt in his apartment. He stopped in the middle of the room and turned to face me. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with everything we hadn't said for the past 48 hours. "I'm an idiot," he finally said, the words a raw exhale. "I'm so sorry, Leo, for what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "For just leaving," he said, shaking his head. "I woke up, and you were there, sleeping on my couch, and the sun was coming up, and I panicked. I just panicked." He looked down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "This is new for me. All of it. I've never felt like that. About anyone." He swallowed hard. "I build things, Leo. Things with plans and right angles. I know how to fix things. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to fix this." My heart, which had been a cold, dead stone in my chest, began to beat again. A slow, painful, hopeful beat. "I thought you regretted it." I confessed, the words tumbling out. "I thought I was a mistake. An experiment. I thought you were straight, and I had just taken advantage of a weird moment." He finally looked up, and his eyes were blazing. "No," he said, his voice fierce. "God, no. Leo, that's not. I thought you regretted it. I thought I had crossed the line, that I'd ruined everything and you'd never want to even look at me again. When I saw your note, I thought I'd scared you away for good. We stood there, two fools, drowning in our own separate anxieties, when all we had to do was talk to each other. This is terrifying, I admitted, a shaky laugh escaping me. All of this I know, he said, a relieved smile breaking through his exhaustion. It is. He took a step closer to me, and another, until he was standing right in front of me, the tips of our shoes almost touching. But I think, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur, that being without you for the last 2 days was a lot more terrifying. He held out his hand. Not the flower, but a small brass key. It sat in the center of his calloused palm, gleaming under the bare bulb of my temporary light fixture. Your apartment is going to be a mess for a while, he said, his gaze unwavering. And my couch is, well, it's big. He paused, his throat working. I don't want to be in my apartment if you're not in it, Leo. The quiet is too loud. It was not a declaration of undying love. It was not a grand, romantic speech. It was better. It was a blueprint, a plan for a new structure we could maybe build together. It was a key, an invitation, a promise. I looked at the key, then back at his face, at the hope and fear warring in his eyes. My own fear was still there, a low hum in the back of my mind. The fear of risk, of being hurt, of this all falling apart. But for the first time, the hope was louder. I reached out, and my fingers closed around the key. Its metal was warm from his skin. My fingers brushed his palm, and this time, neither of us flinched. Okay, I said. The word was small, but it felt like the foundation of a whole new world. Okay, Julian. His smile was like the sun coming out after a long storm. He finally seemed to remember the flower in his other hand. He held it out to me, a little crushed from his grip. My grandmother used to grow these, he said softly. They smell like home. I took the gardenia. Its fragrance was sweet and overwhelming, a scent of new beginnings. The next few weeks were a strange dance of learning a new rhythm. My apartment was slowly put back together by a team of contractors, but I barely spent any time there. I lived out of a duffel bag on Julian's floor. I slept on his couch, but it wasn't long before that felt wrong too. One night, after we'd been talking for hours, curled up at opposite ends of the giant sofa, I fell asleep. I woke in the middle of the night to find myself not on the couch, but in his bed. He had carried me. He was asleep in the armchair, the same one he'd sat in that first night, watching over me. The next night, I didn't wait to be carried. When he went to bed, I followed him. I stood awkwardly in the doorway of his room. He looked at me, then pulled back the covers on the other side of the bed. An invitation. I took it. Sleeping next to him was a revelation. The small, intimate sounds that had once kept me awake, his breathing, the way he shifted in his sleep, were now a lullaby. The solid, warm weight of him next to me was an anchor in the dark. For the first time in my adult life, I did not feel alone when I was asleep. A new routine began to form, one that was not mine or his, but ours. We made coffee together in the morning, bumping hips in his small kitchen. I'd read on the couch while he sketched at his table, the scratch of his pencil a comforting counterpoint to the rustle of my pages. He started listening to classical music in the evenings, something he'd found on a list of music for concentration. I found myself humming along to Bach while I washed the dishes. My apartment was eventually finished. The ceiling was new, the walls were freshly painted, the floors were refinished. It was clean, perfect, and silent. I stood in the doorway, and it felt like a stranger's house. A museum of a life I used to live. I carried the last of my boxes upstairs to Julian's apartment. He was clearing a space on his bookshelf, the one with Neruda and Whitman. For your stories, he said, his smile soft. I started placing my books on the shelf, my collection of dead poets mingling with his. Our two worlds, paper and wood, silence and sound, merging into one. It felt right. It felt like home. Sometimes I think about the man I was. The quiet, solitary archivist who lived in a fortress of his own making, terrified of the loud, unpredictable world. He was safe, yes, but he wasn't living. He was just curating. Julian was the flood. He was the storm. He was the disruption I never knew I needed. He didn't just break through my ceiling. He broke through every wall I had ever built. He filled my life with noise and sawdust, and the scent of gardenias and the chaotic, beautiful, terrifying reality of loving someone. He took my small, silent life and made it big and loud and infinitely better. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the one that rewrote my entire story from a quiet tragedy into a sprawling, messy, wonderful romance. Looking back, I wonder about those moments of fear, the hesitation before opening a door or answering a question. How many of us build walls to keep ourselves safe, only to find out we've built a prison? Have you ever had a moment that completely shattered your routine, only to find it was the best thing that ever happened to you? Let me know your story in the comments below. And if you'd like to hear more stories about finding love where you least expect it, please subscribe. You never know when your own life is about to get a little bit louder.